Should Christians use their imagination? Why are so many movie adaptations so bad? And hey, it's not a dad bod, it's called a father figure. All this and more on this week's episode of Faith and Pop Culture.
Hey, well, what is up, everyone? Welcome to episode number 14 of the Faith and Pop Culture Podcast. It is me, your host, Daniel, and I am joined at the desk, as I always am, by the sage wisdom to my fortune cookie, Mr. Samuel David Camp. What is up?
Oh, not too much. Now, do you open those for the cookie or for the fortune?
Well, see, I enjoy both, because I enjoy wisdom. I'm a man that likes to learn, but I also like a good cookie.
Yeah, those are...
So...
As cookies go, those aren't that great.
I mean, they're not that great, but I feel like knowing that they're like a vessel for...
There's a little surprise on the inside.
There's this thing about that just like makes it the highlight of, when you order in takeout. But speaking of things that, fill us with joy and are filled with surprises, fatherhood. So this is an important week.
Yeah.
At least for those of us, that are fathers or have fathers or...
Dad week.
This is definitely Dad week. So we're both fathers. We both have two kids apiece. Some might say we're pretty good fathers.
Yeah, I like to think so.
We haven't done a scientific poll.
Yeah,
but
I haven't done an exhaustive study, but
the general consensus would be that hey, we're not that bad. But fatherhood, that's
let's just say I'm not the worst dad.
Yeah, there's worse. Speaking of, no, we won't go into that. Yeah. But yeah, this week, Sunday is Father Day. It can be a complicated day because I know. Sure. Yeah, I'm a father. I like gifts. So I expect my kids to I remind them that I wipe I clean their diapers. They can buy me a gift on Father's Day.
Do something.
But I know, hey, not everyone has fathers that they necessarily want to celebrate, and it's always been kind of same as Mother's Day, a complicated thing. But I think there is no question whether it's positive memories or negative memories or connotations that the role of the father remains a very crucial and fundamental aspect of just I think all people's lives in one way or another. And I think sort of that kind of the role of the father almost has unless you sort of are looking for it, you might not even notice it, but especially in the last couple years at least, has had a very prominent role just in pop culture, in media, in stories. I think sort of there's the narrative, which again, there can be truth to more than one thing at the same time, but sort of the narrative that all Hollywood and movies do these days is deconstruct masculinity, and it's sort of...
Or the family.
And it's sort of an attack on this and trying to, kind of change and discard some of those traditional things. And anyway, that may well be true in certain situations. I would say that it is true in certain things, but kind of at the same time, if you sort of look for it, it's also clear that we can't move away though from the importance of fatherhood. Because I wrote an article for our website, thecollision.org. You can go check it out. We'll link it in the show notes. But I wrote an article not long ago, kind of about that, because this is I review movies. So I see all the big movies that are coming out, and it just sort of struck me at one point that so many of the movies, the big prominent movies in storytelling, focused in large part on that dynamic between fathers and their children. In the article I mentioned the Dungeons and Dragons movie, Ant-Man and the Wasp, Knock at the Cabin, Pinocchio, Top Gun, Maverick, Avatar, Way of Water, The Last of Us, so many of these these big hit shows. And kind of since I published that article, just if I think of the most recent things I have reviewed for The Collision, the movie If, which was very much about sort of a daughter and her father and kind of, that parental relationship. The Garfield movie, first movie to introduce Garfield's father, and it's very much the tension comes from that kind of dynamic. Furiosa, the other kind of big movie that came out recently, is also a sort of a father figure, and not a biological father, but sort of that dealing with that relationship of a bad father's influence. So I think it's interesting because there's something to that, and I feel kind of the power of a lot of pop culture and media is that it does reflect sort of where we are as a culture, the longings and the needs and the questions. And if that's true, then it's interesting that so much of the storytellers, like the movies that we gravitate to, are like focused on that relationship.
Yeah, I think it is a reflection of that felt need of either celebrating good dads or trying to figure out, trying to fill that void that was left by perhaps like an absent father or just, a not good father. And and that's the sort of thing, we talk about it all the time, but, churches, and I think either you or Mike maybe that said this, but churches are good at answering questions that nobody's asking sometimes. And I think as believers, when you look at these sort of trends in Hollywood, and in, again, it's not monolithic, but there are a lot of instances where there is this dynamic, this paternal relationship dynamic is explored. I think that you should perk up and take note and listen, because obviously the Bible has a lot to say about fathers and how they should be in the world, how they should relate to their children. And I think you see in real time our culture is wrestling with those ideas, both the what is the ideal for fathers, and also what's the reality for fathers. And
Yeah.
I think you can see both.
And I feel like you see this very clearly with the show Bluey, which we're
Yes.
both, I don't know what we call ourselves, Blueyites. What's the,
Yeah, huge fan. I don't know.
we're fans. We watch it for our kids, even if they're not around. We'll finish the episode.
Exactly.
But because it has become, again, it's a beloved show. Like, you have to.
Like it is, yeah, it is meteoric in its rise of popularity and belovedness, I guess you could say.
But hey, even that does not stop people from nitpicking and criticizing.
But it's not perfect. I'll have you know.
Because fathers aren't perfect, and that's been kind of one of the common criticisms or discussion points or debates, is this that like the Bluey parents, and like particularly the father, that like it's an unrealistic expectation for fathers that that he actually he plays with his kids and he's involved and he's
Yeah.
engaged. And because even like I just typed in to my Google Bluey unrealistic fathers, and like you can scroll for pages and pages of art hot takes of people that are like pushing back on this, that like but that's unrealistic for our culture, that because he's so engaged. And I think in part it's because like sort of the standard trope for fathers is like they're just a bunch of buffoons, like
Yeah.
sort of the Homer Simpson type,
Yeah.
like the the Family Guy guy, all those, and like, not just animated, I think like in general too, is
Yeah.
like sort of the classic father figure is sort of like the deadbeat guy that he just sort of, he's home from work and he's just watching football with a beer, and the wife's doing all the work and the kids, and he's just sort of checked out watching his TV.
Yeah.
So like a show like Bluey comes and totally like pushes back against that, or even maybe doesn't push back, but it shows a different
It just shows a different option for fathers, which I don't even think I wouldn't even say it's real pushy in how it portrays Bandit, but it's like, hey, fathers can actually behave this way as well.
Yeah, and obviously like, it is like a a fictional thing. I don't know, like I think they both work, right? The Bluey parents. It seems like
I think so.
Like you never really see them. Like he seems like he's always home. I don't know if all the shows is like take place on the weekend or whatnot. But it is interesting like how much that show like not only like appeals to kids, but like also to parents. Like that hey, obviously some people maybe take issue or feel threatened that that means they got to be engaged with their children. But there's something about
like my kids,
about that dynamic of like a family and like a mother and a father that are like invested in like in their kids, that clearly like resonates with a need that we have in our culture.
Yeah, well, because I think it speaks to really, I think a fundamental need of every human is to have a family unit, and I think that's perhaps the sort of the longing that the show like Bluey is tapping into, that like, no, it's not perfect, but it's like, it's a loving family, a functioning family. It's not, broken, and it's not, terribly one-sided as far as like, the mom does everything and the dad just, sloughs off and plays around at work and whatever. So I think there is like it or not, I think that is a longing and a desire that everyone has, I think, to some degree. Some people don't want to have kids, whatever, like that's fine. But I think if they were to reflect, they would, if they came from a broken home, they would have wanted to not come from a broken home.
Yeah, and even just the theme sort of has run parallel with like the one of fathers and sons or daughters is like what they would call like found family, like the non-biological family that is nevertheless like kind of fills that void of like, hey, we all need someone in our life, and like we can all be that someone to other people. Which again, like which has always like, resonated with me because like my wife lost her father when she was like 4 years old in like a tragic accident. So like she never had that like biological relationship, and yet she had a bunch of like kind of found family. Like she had other male figures like in the church, and even like the day she first sort of came to church and came to Jesus, like happened to be on Father's Day, where the preacher was preaching on Psalm, where it says, that God is a father to the fatherless, defender of the widows, in his whole sets, the lonely in families. So I think like, that is something that as Christians, like that theme is not only like we can be inspired to like see it in all these movies, but it's also something that we can like very readily affirm and just see the need for it. Like people long for that relationship, and like as the church, like that's not just limited to like the movies choices they make. Like that's a deep emotional thing, and like we can kind of step into to some of that void. Kind of another topic or just thing that stood out to me, that kind of a viral post that I just thought was interesting. I think there's I think it speaks or at least touches on some interesting conversations. And that is Mr. George R.R. Martin, the author of the Game of Thrones books as well as other things. And, he worked in Hollywood. So he's been around like storytelling and stuff for a long time. And he kind of made a quote, and he has a blog site that's called Not a Blog, that he just posts things like his own thoughts. And
that's awesome.
And again, whether if you're a Christian, you have issues with like Game of Thrones as stories and some of the content, like he is one of the most fascinating people I find for just like speaking about storytelling. Like he, whether you agree with him or not, like he's just very like he's been around it a lot. Like, he understands,
and he's obviously successful at it.
Yeah, and he's good. Like, he sort of is sort of one of these masters of storytelling. That so I think whenever he speaks about sort of that stuff, it's interesting to sort of listen and engage with it. And here's one of in that article, he was talking about like adaptations of movies, like from books and classic stories. He says, everywhere you look, there are more screenwriters and producers eager to take stories and make them their own. It does not seem to matter whether the source material was written by, and then he lists a bunch of, who's who of all the famous authors, or, well, anyone. No matter how major the writer is, no matter how great the book, there always seems to be someone on hand who thinks he can do better, eager to take the story and improve on it. The book is the book, the film is the film, they will tell you, as if they are saying something profound. Then they will make the story their own. They never make it better, though. 999 times out of 1,000, they will make it worse. And to give him some credit too, like in the context of the article, he's actually praising an adaptation of the Shogun show. So he's saying he's praising the 1%. He's not just complaining about everything else. But I think it's an interesting discussion because it might not seem like it applies to a lot of things, but I think it touches on a lot of like controversies or like frustrations just about like adaptations. Like you see that with like the even things like adaptation, like older movies, like the live action Disney remakes, and like how we sort of cross that divide of like, take this old story and like make it modern. What do you change? How do you adapt it? Or, or even just like, some of like the disclaimers before things. And so like it very much, this is something that we, a lot of people are wrestling with of like, what makes a good adaptation? Like at what point are you like, should we not modernize? And like, so what are some of your thoughts on this quote? Do you agree with Mr. George R.R. Martin?
Yeah, I mean, I wonder if it's maybe slightly more than 0.1% of the time they maybe don't improve on the source material, but at least it's at least done well. And I think that's maybe the best that you can aim for. Like, I don't know that there's ever been like someone say that like, the book was fine, but the movie was amazing. Like, I don't know that there's...
some monsters have said that about some classic books.
Yeah. They should be locked up.
Yeah.
Let's be honest.
Because the book is always better.
Yeah, the book is always better. And again, because on the one hand, it's because that came first. Like, you don't see people writing books based on the movie. I mean, I guess maybe that happens.
Yeah, they do, but it's not the same.
Yeah.
No one reads those. Like,
Right. So I think because the books you almost exclusively come first, you already have in your head, like you've already made the movie in your head. And so whatever somebody else makes, it's not going to be as good as the movie that you saw in your head when you were reading.
and I think there's like something to be said about like your favorite version of something is more than likely going to be the one that you experience first. Like
Right.
your favorite Star Wars is going to be, the one that you grew up with. If you
Right.
the original, nothing's as good as the originals. But I know like a lot of people that grew up with the prequels. Those are their favorite Star Wars. That's what they have nostalgia for.
Poor
an
individuals.
enlightened, wayward youth that think those are the best. And hey, maybe people think that about, the sequel. So there's a lot that goes into like. I don't think we're always an unbiased judge of what is.
That's true. That's very true.
But I think it is a dance because like in some sense like are these stories sacred that like, we just because you hear people act as though they are like don't even it's like sacrilegious to try and adapt this for film
Because some of it is.
And those people are right. And like I've always like
but that doesn't stop people from adapting it anyways.
Like, for me like and again maybe you don't agree with this part either but like if the Bible has been adapted then like surely anything is fair game to like we're not going to be like if you can adapt the Bible then like you can adapt Dickens and Jane Austen and Lord of the Rings or whatnot. So like there is a sense that like hey I think stories are meant to be retold and like even a lot of these stories like Star Wars is in many ways like retelling like Flash Gordon things that came before it it's inspired by and like it's not necessarily like an actual adaptation but it's not like totally reinventing the wheel. But I feel like some of the resistance to like this sort of idea is what he touches on as far as the like improving or like making it better.
Yeah.
And I feel like in like for a lot of like Christians, it's like the modernizing. It's the okay, this sort of traditional story, it was good for its time, but like we're more enlightened now, we're better, we're wiser, we're more progressive, we're whatever. So we need to take that story that everyone loved and then turn it into something that is different in order to appease to because even like the Wheel of Time show did that where like those books classic kind of fantasy books and like the show to me is like unwatchable. Like I watched one season, I love the books, couldn't even get into the second season because it very much is changing like focusing on the more like the sexual identity politics and stuff that weren't necessarily central to the book in order to sort of make it more modern and stuff for like today's but what do you think about that? Like is there a sense that because there is a sense that it's not always wrong because we touched on this a couple weeks ago of like it's not always wrong to like some things should change like we didn't have it figured out back then either
right
so we're not like beholden to these ideals.
Well, I think the trick is probably just to figure out what is it that needs to like what's an appropriate change, what's an improved change, and then like what should you just not try and change at all, and which is a very unsatisfying answer, but it's like I think oftentimes what happens is movies or shows will make an adaptation from whatever, and I think they just focus on the wrong things, like you said, like the sexual identity politics of Wheel of Time. It's like, well, like maybe that's not the thing that you should have tried to change. And so it's like, what aspects make it modern without necessarily tying it to like a certain moment in our cultural history? And I think movies that have maybe stood the test of time have been less associated with like this hot button political issue. Like I think you need to try and come away from that as much as you can and maybe just tell the more human stories. You can have elements that are very of the time, but I think trying to make it too political would probably be one of the ways to not. You wouldn't want to modernize it because that's going to be outdated as soon as it.
Because I think that
airs,
even was
which is the problem.
Like some of the newer Star Wars movies or shows, that's been a critique of that. Is like the original ones. Obviously, they were inspired by things that were happening at the time and George Lucas and all that stuff.
Sure.
We're all a product of our time, but they are also time that like, you can watch them now and not even know those connotations and still be moved by the story and like relate to it. Where some of the newer stuff feels like this very much feels like a product of this specific time.
Right.
The humor, a lot of the things to it. But yeah, I think there is a balance because even like, and this, people will probably disagree with me on this, but I think like I actually enjoyed for the most part the live action Little Mermaid. Like, is it as good as the classic? No, of course it's not as good as the classic. Is it just some total train wreck? I thought it was fine, like for what it was. But like some of the changes in that story for, spoiler alert, if you haven't seen a couple of years old movie based on an even older movie, but like at the end of the movie in the cartoon, like, the prince, whatever his name is, he defeats Ursula in the ship. Like he saves the Little Mermaid, where in like the live adaptation, like she's the one in the boat. Like she's the one that sort of, defeats her enemy. And like, I know when that movie came out, like, there's a ton of hot takes and discussion and like outrage about like, this sort of the feminist agenda. And like, now we can't have, which like, I never thought like the prince was ever like, demasculated or anything. He wasn't the one given that moment. Where like, for me, like, I'm okay with a change like that. Like the movie's called The Little Mermaid. It's like a movie aimed at primarily girls. Like, let her be the hero. Let her, like, just, I think some of the messages of just like the traditional Disney of, just sort of like,
waiting for your
wait
prince.
for your prince to come. Like, not that you never explore those types of stories, but like,
I'm happy that we have sort of moved past some of those stories though. Like I'm definitely
like,
with
I think,
you on that.
Like not all change is bad. And I think that
Right.
sometimes gets lost in the fact because a lot of change is bad.
Yeah.
You sort of write it all off. Because like in contrast, like there's the new, which again, I haven't seen the movie, it's not out, like the Snow White movie that's coming out with Rachel Zegler, the girl from Hunger Games. And like all the quotes about that she has said, like it just comes across like this movie is made by people that just hate the cartoon. Like everything about this movie is problematic, so we need to remake it. Not adapt it. Like we're
just redoing
burn it down. And I feel like that's what people get. It's like
been out of shape about.
If it's so problematic that you have to like change everything, then like
just go make something else.
Like, don't like. So I think there is nuance to it that like, hey, not all change is bad, and just because something changed from what you love, doesn't necessarily mean that that's automatically something that Christians and people need to like push back against, even if there are things that just don't need to happen.
Yeah. Well, and speaking of things that probably don't need to happen, would be the show version of Anne of Green Gables. That was something that probably didn't need to be touched.
Which I
never saw it. Like I couldn't. There's never going to be a different Anne in my mind, anyways, and that's me being a curmudgeon, but.
I mean, I try and give things the benefit of the doubt, but sometimes you can just tell, like, I know I'm going to hate that. So I'm not going to put myself through that. I maybe won't speak on it, but I'm not going to put myself through it. And maybe one other, maybe somewhat related thing that I thought we could just touch on a bit, kind of inspired by a movie that I reviewed not long ago, a couple of weeks ago, If, which stands for Imaginary Friends. Do you have imaginary friends? I feel like we had this conversation.
No, I didn't. I don't. If I did, I've forgotten.
Oh. Well, you know what? That's common. That's the point of this movie, that we forget our imaginary friends and we need to rediscover them and, find that childhood innocence again.
Is it sort of like in Fringe, where like all these kids had superpowers, but then when they got older, they had forgotten that they had these
or like
gifts?
Peter Pan. It's a trope. We need
age old.
Look back to our childhood. But there's some like feedback and discussion and stuff that I saw kind of related to this movie from Christians that were sort of criticizing like the imaginary part of it, like that these are, as though like that's something that Christians shouldn't engage with because it's not real. It's like these creatures and things, and that is not that's not an uncommon criticism, because like, I've having done cultural stuff for a while and like written some fictional books, there is a segment of people that are very vocal, at least, about like like Christians read nonfiction, like almost as though like fiction is below us because we're supposed to be focused on like the world, the serious stuff, not just escaping into these sort of weird quasi satanic imaginations and stuff, like and I just hate that. So some of these comments
so you disagree with that?
I have strong feelings about that, and sort of like the important role of the imagination for the life of the Christian, like that is, in some way, that has always been a very central thing Maybe not always in like the way that we think of like imagination is just sort of like dreaming about knights and dragons and stuff, but like in sort of imagining and like kind of making sense of the world through the imagination, like has always been central to like I think Jesus's teachings and about the kingdom, the coming kingdom, like the parables and some of that stuff.
Yeah.
And I feel like we sort of lost some of that because it's almost like we've outgrown, we're Christian. We focus on things that really matter, like,
Like John Bunyan's Pilgrim Progress.
nonfiction. And like, because I can't tell you how many times I've had a Christian, like, sort of like shake their head at me. Like if I mention like an author I like or like Tolkien or something and be like, oh, like I don't read fiction. And it's sort of like, you need to like bow down, the saint. They don't read fiction, but are you
the most boring person in the world?
Which is funny because most of the nonfiction people that they will read, then if you like, these like, titans of Christian theology and church history, like all read fiction and like a lot of them wrote fiction and like,
yeah.
So there's a lot to be said about that. But am I just grumpy like about this? Like,
no, I mean,
about like imagination as a Christian.
No, I mean, I think it's fantastic. I had a raging imagination as a kid, and I feel like I probably still do. And I think it's great. I mean, I think that's where it in many ways it's sort of the source of all of the good things that we even have in life sometimes, because it's like even if you think about all the stuff that isn't imagined, it was once imagined, like not even necessarily in thinking in terms of entertainment or books or whatever, but like without imagination, it's almost like you don't have anything, because for anything to come into the world, it needs to first be imagined. Like someone has to think, wouldn't it be nice if there was, a computer that you could fold open? Like somebody had to imagine that at some point. Like everything that we sort of have around us was at one point in someone's imagination. And so the idea that, we should downplay imagination as Christians is kind of, to me, it's sort of a silly idea. I mean, I understand that, you don't want to get carried away with your imagination, maybe on the odd occasion, but like, I just feel like we're so far from
because there is
issue.
A danger. I mean, of all things, of like going too far and like you live in this sort of Marvel world or imaginary world or whatever, and like you're just detached from the reality of life, and like you can't communicate almost with people that outside of like your fandom of this like made up thing. Like, and I feel like the extreme case is like there is an aspect of that. But like you said, like the imagination is, in like a philosophical way, like how we make sense of the world and our situation and where we fit.
And not even make sense, but even make the world. Like,
nothing shows the lack of imagination and the need for more of it than the fact that it took so long to make a taco with a flat bottom. It's like, like for years,
true.
This is what we have.
You had to have tools.
To hold it up or have a tool.
Yeah.
And then some genius was like, hey, what if we just made it flat? And it's like, the world has never been the same. But even like if you look at like the way that Jesus, like I said, like he told parables, which are all made up stories. Like I feel like even sometimes when we read those or talk about them, we almost like dissect them as though they are like historical, like the Good Samaritan.
Yeah.
But like they're not.
Mr. Samaritan, when he was on his way.
Yeah, and then we try to get into like the backstories and stuff, and it's like, well, these are like made up stories.
Yeah.
To help people understand, theological truth, and even like the two things that Jesus instituted to like for us to remember the reality of the crucifixion and the resurrection, like baptism and the Lord's Supper, which like only work in the realm of like imagination, like at least if you're like a Protestant with some of that stuff. But like baptism is like a like a play, like you're you're dying, you're not literally dying in the water, like you're
right.
It all symbolizes stuff, and like because we have imaginations, we can understand that. Or like the Lord's Supper, like the bread being the body, like those are symbolic, like those are we like those speak to our imaginations, and we're able to sort of make those connections and actually like understand reality better, because we sort of filter that through like the imaginative part of our brain. There's if you've never read, of course I'm going to promote this, but it is worth reading even if you're not a nerdy Tolkien person. But On Fairy Stories is sort of Tolkien's classic.
I have not read that, so
you need to read it, because it's in some ways it's sort of his apologetic for fantasy. Like he sort of defends the the fact that Christians should write fantasy and tell these stories and stuff. But it's a lot deeper than just sort of that. Like, hey, elves are good. We need to tell. Like, he gets into like the theological underpinnings of like the imagination and sort of the way we're wired and kind of God. And one of the quotes that gets pulled out a lot in that essay, right? Tolkien says, "Fantasy remains a human right we make in our measure and in our derivative mode because we are made, and not only made, but made in the image and likeness of a maker." And that's kind of where he gets his whole theory of like subcreation and the fact that like we make and imagine things because we're made in the image of God, who like there was nothing and he made and imagined and like created this world.
Yeah.
That like it's natural for us to want to create worlds and characters and stories and stuff because we're made in the image of someone that created, and we can never do in the same way God can. Like,
Right,
we can't
right.
create wholly original and stuff like God, but that there is some important part of just sort of the Christian life that is reflected when we do stuff like that.
Yeah. No, I think imagination is really essential, I think, to not only life, but certainly to the Christian life. And I think there's just like, if you didn't need imagination, or if it was somehow not congruous with the Christian life, then there would be no stories in the Bible. Like why bother writing, communicating a book to people if story isn't, or imagination isn't essential? Then just put out the facts, make it just a bullet point list of the do's and the don'ts or whatever, and be done with it. But that's not how the Bible is written, and it's not how it's communicated to us. And I think part of that is because of imagination. And I think it somehow completes, I think, our understanding of things in a certain way.
Yeah, and I think it helps you see it from like a different perspective, because like
Yeah.
one of the most like interesting verses like in the whole Bible is where it talks about like Jesus speaking everything in parables, like, and I forget exactly the wording of it, like so that they would not understand. And it's sort of this weird thing of like, so like, the Bible's saying Jesus spoke in stories that no one would understand. That seems counterproductive at best. Like, and there's a lot that has been like unpacked and scholars on that, but like I've always taken that in some ways to be like it makes you work a bit. Like it you have to kind of wrestle with it. It's not just sort of telling you facts to sort of that you can either accept or reject or whatever. Like,
Right.
he's telling these stories and not necessarily like explaining all the meaning. And the moral of the story is like you do some of that to his disciples, but not to like the bigger audience. And I feel like it makes you sort of work and process it and see things like in a different angle, that to where you actually understand the situation better because it sort of was worked out in your imagination and not just sort of more abstract.
Yeah, because you can know like a concept or a principle, but I think when you see it in a story, it just brings it. I think it colors the image, I guess, if that's a way to think about it.
And
Like
there's power to it, and like the movie If is very much about like, and there's power to that even when you're a grown up. You don't need to, not necessarily that you just talk to imaginary friends. That might be a little weird, but like sort of what that represents.
That's what I'm going to do now.
I mean, you might, and we'll try not to judge you, but that there is sort of power in some of that childlike stuff, even as an adult. And again, Jesus, come to me like a child, like that is very much true to some
And I do think it's very sad, I think, when adults lose their sense of wonder. And I think that's part of, maybe what the movie, I haven't seen If, but what it's getting at is like, don't be so grown up that you can't like be amazed or have wonder as part of your existence.
Because there's a great quote, and then we'll
experience.
move on. I think it's C.S. Lewis, it's him or Tolkien. I think it was Lewis that said this though, about sort of, that like an enchanted forest, like a story, doesn't make like the child or whoever, the reader, like kind of lose touch with reality, but it just makes like real force feel a bit more enchanted. Like it sort of, it gives wonder to the world rather than just sort of making you like, unable to distinguish between it. So, hey, Christians, if you're a Christian, feel no shame about, using that imagination muscle and enjoying stories that do, use the imagination and appeal to the imagination. But speaking of movies and stories that we have the option to engage with, the next segment of this episode we have out now and coming soon. So a couple of things this week, not necessarily a lot of big new movies. But we did have a new Star Wars show, Star Wars: The Acolyte, which I have not seen the first couple episodes, but you have seen it.
I have seen
So,
the
what is
first couple of
your
episodes, and I would give it a too enthusiastic meh. is maybe how I would summarize it. It does some interesting stuff, I guess. Kind of cool, but it's not that great in my opinion. Like it's just, I think it sort of follows the trajectory of most, with the exception of Andor, um, Star Wars shows, which is like already it's sort of just breaking up storylines. And I was trying to think why what about it was kind of annoying me, and I think partly it's um, excessive camera movement. I think this is like a real technical thing, but like I think part of the reason I there's some way I don't connect with it is because like the camera is constantly moving. Not like in a I'm sick and I can't focus, but like there's just all these dramatic push-ins, pull out, like all this stuff is happening, like presumably in service of the story, but I think it just ends up just muddling everything. And then there's like, I don't know. I'm not enthusiastic about it so far.
what would you say? Because like for me, again, like I said, I think last episode, I grew up with Star Wars was the first non-cartoon anything I ever watched. Like I'm a Star Wars kid, but I've become disillusioned or just bored or not interested.
Yeah.
But like part of what has kept me still checking out these shows and stuff is that like if you said about Father's Day, I have kids. I have two boys that are about the same age I was when I got into Star Wars. They love Star Wars. Like they know all the characters. So like we've been able to watch. We didn't watch Andor together. That was a bit too not kid friendly, but like it was slower.
It's pretty serious, slow.
A bit too serious. But we've watched like Obi-Wan and Ahsoka and some of those other shows. I mean, you've only seen a couple episodes. Like this one from the trailers at least is like, is it too dark and gritty and stuff, or is it still like?
I mean, like people die in it. I don't know that it's necessarily too. I don't think it's necessarily too dark and gritty, but it's just it is pretty. What's the word? No, I can't think of the word now. But it's maybe too. It takes itself too seriously. I think that's kind of a theme of a lot of like new Star Wars shows. Is like I don't feel like there's a lot of like humor.
Well, it's funny because George Lucas just went viral with some quotes recently where he's trying to defend the fact that people didn't like his prequel movies. And essentially he said, like, I made Star Wars for kids. Then I made more movies. Like the original people that were kids were not kids anymore. It's like they didn't like, and again, there's other reasons to not like the prequels, but sort of that idea that like Star Wars at its heart has always sort of been like for younger people. Like, not that older people can't instantly. I still think those are perfect movies, like 10 out of 10 all the way around.
Yeah.
But like, there's always been an aspect to that, and like maybe like we talked about earlier, I'm just so used to that experience that I'm not really interested in like more gritty, grim like Star Wars for adults. Like, tell meaningful stories and stuff, but like I don't need I mean, Andor was kind of like that, and I liked Andor, but
but again, like I think there's a lot of reasons I think Andor did well. At least, I feel like it was a better show than most of the other stuff they put out. But I think part of that is it seems like it takes itself too seriously, and it's almost like you can almost see them taking themselves too seriously in a weird way. And like even just like some of the show takes place on Coruscant and like the Jedi Council, and it feels so much more like the prequels and like no feelings of like the original trilogy. And I think that's part of probably most people's frustration with it, is because most of these new shows have been way too close to the prequels in like quality and sentimentality, I guess, versus like the original trilogy. And maybe I don't know. It just seems, who knows? There's probably far more reasons than I could think of why it just doesn't land, I don't think.
Because I've seen opinions seem to be mixed online about it, but at this point, I never know what to trust for like the real hardcore people that like it, or like, and the people that are going to hate it regardless because it's Disney. Like, so it's hard to.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
might wait. I'm sort of because I'm not going to do a review for it. I might wait and to see if I'll let you or someone watch more. And see if
Yeah.
it's okay for like the kids to watch all the way through, and then maybe I'll check it out. Something that everyone should check out. It's not a new movie, but it's new on streaming. Is Godzilla Minus One just dropped on Netflix? This is like my favorite movie of last year. This movie is so good. I think I saw it was like the first movie ever to be #1 on Netflix and like also #1 on like rental on iTunes at the same time.
Oh,
Like the
wow.
first movie that's ever done that. I think it resonated with a lot of people, and I do think that the movie's like subtitles, like Japanese language and then subtitled. I think Netflix has like a dubbed version, but I saw like a
I
clip
can't
of it.
imagine it's
And I couldn't even get through the clip.
no.
Like, watch you adjust
Oh,
the
like,
subtitles.
yeah.
Just power through. But yeah, there's something about like,
A rule of thumb when viewing movies in a different language is always do subtitles, never do the dubbed.
yeah, because
Like
it
never.
pulls you out.
And some of these streaming services will try and like force the dubbed version on, like they'll just default to like whatever your default language is in this platform, and you can tell immediately like, whoa, this show, this is not in English, like this has been dubbed, and you have to go in and like change all your settings.
'Cause the only thing that might, even then, I'm probably not going to, is just that if I wanted my kids to watch it, they can read, but I don't know if they can sit through and read that much. But even then, maybe I'll just wait for them to watch it when they can read faster.
fast enough.
So not do that. But kind of things coming up soon. Shout out to there's the new Angel Studios movie, which we'll give more. We'll get into more when it gets closer because it comes out July 4th, so still a while away. The Sound of Hope, but I have seen it and it is really good. As this is
Okay.
one of their better movies. So again, stay tuned. We'll have a more in-depth review for that, and also Inside Out 2 comes out this week. We'll have a review for that.
Which I feel like it's been a long time since I've seen that. I feel like the first one was good.
Yeah, like I think the first one is definitely like the Mount Rushmore of Pixar. It's on there. Like,
Okay,
it's got to
yeah.
be one of the
It's just been a while, and I think I maybe only
like
saw it
Up.
once.
It's probably up there.
Oh, yeah.
The first Toy Story. Like, but
Wall-E.
it is one of the best. Like it is really good. And part of me is
Are you?
nervous.
I was gonna say, like, how do you feel
I
about?
think the trailers look good. I don't know. I'm cautiously optimistic.
Yeah, lightning rarely strikes twice, and that's always the fear, I think, when you have such a blockbuster the first go round. It's like, okay, how are you going to live up to this, and how are you going to ruin it?
Yeah, and the thing is, like, we'll always have the first one. So if the second
Yeah.
one's terrible, we'll stick with the first one. But I want this to be good. So,
Yeah.
because I think it explores some interesting things. But things that always live up to the hype and really I don't think have ever been terrible is the next segment of this podcast. We have things we like that you should like too.
Well, something that I was sort of turned on to by, I think my brother had mentioned this, and this is a bit of left field, but it's a thing that you can do if you use Spotify to listen to music or whatever. You can type in day list in the search bar, and depending on the day of the week and the time of day, you'll get this like customized list for you that has kind of a funny title. Like I did it just now, and it's indie chill mellow Thursday afternoon. And so like that, but other times I've done it and it's been like I don't know, like Gregorian chant evening or something, like something ridiculous, because I listen to classical music sometimes. And one, the titles are always hilarious, and it's like, okay, yeah, I guess I'm guilty of that because it's pulling it from whatever the music is you listen to. And two, it's just kind of, if you ever need sort of like, I don't want to think about, I just need some tunes, whatever, I don't want to have to like find a playlist or find an artist, you can just put in day list in your search bar of Spotify, and you'll be surprised.
I wonder, like, is Monday just filled with like depressive, like death metal, like
Probably.
Mondays are the worst.
Monday mood or blues or whatever.
Monday.
Probably, yeah. That's it's a lot of sad playlists, I guess.
It's so funny things like that. Like I wonder who
I don't,
discovers this sort of thing, all these little like quirks.
or who, like, yeah. Again, back to imagination. Like, That's a brilliant idea because it's just kind of fun, and you'll see people share their day lit. Because if it, uh, some can be pretty funny, like just based on like the theme of the music, I guess.
And it pulls from what you're listening history.
I think so. I'm not even sure how it all.
Yeah, I have such a narrow.
I know it's all gonna just be like.
Hey, Mondays feels a lot like Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Day.
Yeah, exactly. So
power metal again.
Wow. No, this is Norwegian power metal, not German. So yeah, check it out if you use Spotify, and I'd love to see.
Yeah,
love to know.
And if you're, let us know what your funny titles for that.
Yeah, send us your day list titles.
So hey, maybe I will check that out and let it pick metal music for me instead of picking it on my own. But we are glad that you guys picked us to join us once again for another episode of Faith and Pop Culture. Always a lot of fun stuff to get into. Kind of look forward to each week, and I think this is healthy as Christians to, even if you don't have like a lot of answers all the time, just to like, hey, talk about pop culture, talk about stories, talk about the questions and stuff that are out there, and just sort of work through that. So we're glad that you guys have joined us, and we hope you will join us again next Thursday, like every week, for more conversations on faith and pop culture.